What is going on, world? Welcome back once again. My name is ZacNovak and this is ZacNovak Plays Games, or Baked ZacNovak. In today's video, Gambit. Was it actually as good as people said, and how to actually, be good at it if you want to be good at it. Roll the intros, let's get into it, and I hope you enjoy. Alrighty, well, Destiny 2 Forsaken is only, well, a few hours or maybe a few more hours, depending on when you actually see this, away. One of the main features is the PvEvP mode. Now in itself, Gambit was amazing. Players who would actually fight enemies, bank modes in itself, try to take down all opponents in the process. For 24 hours it was actually live, but it is actually going to be live again and actually going to be live for a while because, well, it's actually coming with Forsaken. So people that actually are anticipating this and are kind of lucky people that got into Gambit and actually played on the weekend when it was available, good to you. People like myself, I kind of only played it for about 2 matches, maybe 3 matches, but it was really enjoyable. Let's go over 13 tips on how you can actually dominate in the actual Gambit mode. I will actually have to give a shout out to Polygon because they actually did write this article, and yeah. Anyway, starting off, quickly, I do want to state the Gambit in itself was an initial design lead by Lars Bakken, and him in himself actually did do, the design lead. Robbie Stevens was actually another person that actually came into it and has given players a few tips on how they can actually, be better at Gambit. After all, a lot of people want to actually know how they can be good, I myself included. Let's go over the features. Let's go over what he's actually stated with the tips. Now, Gambit is the first PvEvP mode in actual Destiny. It is actually, in Halo, which in itself was a lot of fun, but it wasn't actually in the same kind of, process of what Gambit is. Now with Gambit, it is 2 teams of 4 players who can actually drop into separate arenas, battling a bunch of different enemies within this small space. When in itself the enemies are killed, they drop what is called motes. Now players can actually gather and deposit into a giant cylindrical bank that is in the middle of the actual arena. A lot of people that actually kind of went through and didn't realize what they had to do, like myself, were kind of confused. Or they do actually state the first team in itself to bank 75 motes spawns a boss on the other team, and the first team in itself to take down their actual boss, which is the Primeval, wins the round. Now Gambit matches players in itself out in a best of 3 match format, so you do actually get a chance to see who is actually better than the other. Now the one thing with Gambit was in its first process, players could actually mess with the opposing team by doing different emotes and stuff when they actually were dropped in itself. Players, if they went from 5, 10 or 15 motes, can actually be banked to send extra enemies called blockers to the other side's team. Those in themselves will actually block and lock down the bank so players can't actually deposit, making it impossible for most players actually to get around. Now there was actually a chance of if you did kill these enemies you were actually able to deposit, but if you're in a team like itself I was, that didn't actually go very well. It was one of those things where we actually got the Primeval straight up and they were still healing their Primeval. We'll talk about that later. However, at a certain point, when you are actually able to do something that is called invade, there will be a portal that you run through, jump into it, and you're able to invade the opposing team. You and yourself can actually go in once you have your super, which is a good idea, and actually just blast everyone and have a lot of fun. Don't have to actually go for their enemies, just go for the actual other players. Anyway, continue on. Now, according to Lars Bakken himself, Gambit is designed to be accessible to pretty much all players, whether they love PvE or in itself love PvP. If you love to slam other Guardians into the ground then in itself, however, it is a lot of fun to go around and actually just kill a bunch of enemies. It is certainly almost like Prison of Elders, except with a twist. In itself, I do actually really like it. Now, players in itself are easily able to get lost in the first actual few times they do jump through in the Gambit modes. In itself, if you are like me, do not worry, people will actually get stuck and do certain things. Lars Bakken actually suggests just running around a map and kind of killing enemies and seeing where you actually can go. If there is a certain point that you actually can feel where you're working out, get those enemies, get those motes, and then get back to the bank. Gambit in itself is about killing combatants and collecting motes to put in the bank, while in itself a lot of teams will actually go in and try to get the most motes possible, or actually try to jump through the portal when they actually can see a chance. Maybe you should actually see if one of the other teammates can do it better. If you haven't actually got heavy, then I suggest letting someone else that does have heavy go through. Just keep going around and banking those motes. It's a lot of fun, and it's pretty much one of those things where if you get into a groove, you are really freaking liking it. Now in itself, players will actually go down to certain parts where you do actually have, well, I guess you can call them stupid plays. That in itself does result in a death, and a lot of people in itself do actually die. One of those things in itself is not like the others. Now with death mode in the Gambit, it is actually a punishing part where, as Lars Bakken states, that is the hardest thing to actually wrap your mind around while learning the mode. If you die in Gambit, you lose all the motes you're carrying. They don't fall on the ground or even become accessible to allies, they disappear forever. In itself, if you are collecting motes for a few minutes, maybe if you got a large collection, Lars Bakken actually suggests that maybe you should play it safe, where you can actually, get a bunch of motes and bank them, keep going around, and hopefully you can get to 75. Speaking of getting to 75, once you actually get to a certain point, again, you're able to go in and step on the enemy's toes in a great way where they can actually lose a Gambit. If you do go in and actually invest time in the crowding of your allies, consider where you actually need to be most. If you're one of those people that does have special or you do have heavy, then maybe you should go out and actually decimate enemies in front of your allies in itself. Allies in itself do actually need an actual helping hand most times, just because, well, if you're killed in a large group, that doesn't actually mean you should all run away and let your allies do all the banking. Just pretty much focus on doing the same thing. Bank it, collect it, bank it, collect it, invade when you can. But it is really a team-based mode, and in itself, with itself being a team-based mode, it's better to actually go through with a team when you're multitasking. But keep moving in Gambit just to state, because, well, if you stand in a center of, well, anywhere, you might actually get dropped. In itself, you'll pretty much stand a better chance in winning if you do run around. Alrighty, now on the top of the screen, do be aware that there is an actual part in Gambit where you can actually see what the enemy's part is at, well, their status bar is at. Once they have actually got to a certain point, it's going to be one of those things where motes are dropped into the actual bank and, well, we get a primeval. These big bastards are one of those things that are ready to spawn at all times and are very dangerous. Keep in mind, you are actually able to go and see how many motes your teammates have, as I did state, with that little thing up above the top of the screen. It's one of those things where if you are kind of falling behind, maybe put on your try hard pants and see if your friend get more than 13 motes, if that's possible. And if your friend in itself does have 13 motes, maybe you should actually go around and see if you can get 8, as Steven suggests. Letting them fill up to 15 so you can actually drop them in the bank for a bigger blocker is always a good idea. And speaking of good ideas, make sure you do know that it is important not to die in Gambit, but when you are feeling a little greedy, don't go in understanding the level until you've actually lost your 15 motes to greed, which that in itself is pretty bad. But wanting to actually build the biggest blocker possible is admirable, but it's not worth losing all those motes. So if you do have more than 13 motes or 8 motes, go and actually post them in the bank, because yeah, enemies for the other team. We do know that death in Destiny 2 is prevalent, and especially when players are actually going up against giant exploding enemies that can kill you with one quick swipe, like this guy right here. Yeah, he is one of those escaped convicts from the Prison of Elders, and we can't actually damage him because, well, he's too powerful and he just knocks us down, kills us. But that is not really talking about Gambit. Back to Gambit in itself. Prioritize your actual enemies and analyze your foes. In itself, each time when an enemy does spawn, it'll come with a variety of enemies. These foes in themselves will actually drop a variety of motes based on how difficult they actually are. When they are standard ones, they'll drop just a single mote. When they are yellow shields and glowing, they shall drop you likely of 5 motes or something like that. If you're focusing on big enemies in itself first, like Fallen Captains or Vex Minotaurs, make sure that they're actually getting destroyed. As well as keeping in mind there is Exploding Thrall. Although with the Exploding Thrall, you need to prioritize your foe, you need to prioritize your enemy, and you need to also prioritize your arena. In itself, if you are prioritizing your fire, you will get lost in your own excitement, so make sure you're actually seeing what you're doing and just don't go willy-nilly. Or go in willy-nilly and have a lot of fun. Although there are plenty of different ways you can actually play in Gambit, one of the things that is most successful and team-based is actually finding roles for each players. Do you want to actually be a slayer, one of those people that actually runs to the front aggressively taking down big enemies and banking your team's motes? Or do you want to be one of those teams where you go into invade, always ready to actually cause trouble on the other side? You in itself can actually determine that during the match with your actual friends if you are talking to them. In itself, blockers are one of those things you just want to destroy, so if you have a super, maybe pop that to destroy them. If you're going through to invade, maybe pop your super to actually kill the enemies. Keeping in mind when you're sending blockers over to the enemy, that is a huge part of Gambit in itself. Banking 5 modes at once will send a Taken Phalanx, 10 will actually send a Taken Knight, and 15 will send a Taken Ogre, with an eye laser that physically moves targets. Knowing that your limits are what you can actually do, maybe go through and bank things successfully, squarely, and into a point where you don't get greedy. Sometimes when some people want to actually send a specific blocker to the actual enemies, they just don't have the enough motes. So in itself, Steven suggests that certain players should use each of their teams to go against each blocker. Now, the Phalanx blocker is perfect for just annoying the enemy and making their lives more difficult when they want to actually bank, according to the static. Perfect stall tactic if you're behind. The Taken Knight is actually the most lethal of the 3, making it more choice for when the enemy is holding onto a bunch of motes right before you actually invade, and the Ogre in itself also offers the biggest bullet sponge ever. He is actually keeping the enemy team from banking and for longer than all other enemies, so choose wisely. Keep in mind there is also going to be Cabal and Hive, which is pretty cool. In itself, just maximize your information for your actual run and then you can ruin the opponent's game. Now, ruining the opponent's game also has to do with invasion. In itself, it is scary, but on the other end, it is actually a lot of fun. You'll only have a limited time to actually get in there and kill a few people, but in doing so, you can actually do a lot of damage. If you have your super, go in and blast it, and it's going to be a lot of fun. If you in itself are getting invaded and you need to be ready for communications, because that invader in itself will actually come in at a random location and you will be able to take him down ASAP if you do actually team fire. Although Gambit is a round based mode in itself, if it runs on the best of 2 out of 3 systems, this in itself means that if you fail once without losing the entire match like any other round based mode, you will actually be ready to switch up your play between rounds. So make sure you move your weapons around, and if your loadout isn't working, try something different or simply adjust the way you're actually banking your motes. If an enemy is dumped like 3 ogres on the top we're 3 minutes into the round, Steven suggests that you should actually prioritize throwing out level 5 blockers as frequently as possible and then try to clutch the invasion. Remember, Gambit is always flexible. Gambit in itself, if you actually have noticed, is a mode where if you're carrying the lead, you're going a lot of good. If you aren't actually carrying the lead, then you need to actually make a comeback happen, and if so, you're able to get the 50 modes down, you can actually still stall it and make it into a game through where the high value target system goes up against your enemies. If in itself, when you're down, the game will also spawn a glowing enemy that drops a shower of motes, which I did talk about before, the ones that are glowing. Kill them, then simply collect the motes and then deposit them to help actually catch up. Between the constant invasions during the primeval phase and the increased motes when you're down, it never feels like you're actually out of the game in Gambit. It always feels like you're having fun. And then again, if you aren't actually winning, don't worry, don't get distressed, and actually just try again. You'll get through it. It's fun. As I did state before, using your super, it's one of those things where you have to use it correctly. Now in Gambit, it's one of those things where it can be tough using a certain super, but make sure you are actually using your super to try to take these enemies down from a distance, because a lot of people kind of go out there and use, well, the sleeper simulant. Hopefully it's not actually going to get nerfed, because it's a lot of fun to use, and I will state it's pretty decent, but mainly use your super wisely. And if you do actually hear that sleeper simulant going off, try to get out of the way if possible. And finally, the one more thing that I did want to talk about, which is the primeval lieutenants. It is stated that the fight with the primeval can be very hectic, especially if the enemy team is constantly invading and sending over blockers of enemies all at once. The team in itself can take a moment to focus. If you are on that team, don't worry, you'll get through the chaos. You can take out the lieutenants before, well, the set of signs actually appear and the primeval does drop. Once all lieutenants are down, the primeval will melt quickly, making it harder to actually clutch enemy invasions to set your progress back. If you're one of those people, try and focus on the primeval and you'll be actually trying to chew through a massive bullet sponge. So be smart, prioritize, and make sure you are taking out both the enemies and the, well, other players. Now, senior designer Pete Sarrett did actually state that Gambit will be released with penalties for players who quit in the middle of matches. Also, most importantly, Gambit will also offer a join in progress feature if you have actually been kicked out, or you lost connection or anything. While in itself you are being replaced with the team members that are missing for any reason, that in itself is good. But there also is new subclasses coming with Forsaken. In themselves, just kind of going over it, the Titan Hammers will deal large damage to enemy spawns, but also in itself will be devastating in PvE. While in itself, you'd actually have to note that many things may not usually consider like the 6-shot golden gun good in PvE super, or a front filled with powerful enemies. You might not love Nova Bombers in itself to fly slow in its moving version of the PvP, but consider how useful it can actually be in PvE. It is worth losing your speed for the potential big damage of a PvE Slover Bomb, which in itself, I love. However, being one of those people that wants to get a perfect loadout in Gambit, you won't actually really be able to get it. There is kind of two different facets of the game mode of Gambit. There is the perfect exotic to boot, and if you need to find something that can be flexible and powerful, look in your actual inventory, which in itself could be helpful. We do have actual bows coming, so maybe they will be pretty decent in certain things, but we'll have to see. Be prepared. When the initial invasion portal pops up, it can actually be very exciting for certain people. Depending on how you actually have been coordinated with your team, make sure you do have someone that is running through and being the invader. If you yourself feel like you can actually take it down, then maybe try it out for yourself. If you've got some special, you've got some heavy, give it a go. It is a lot of fun. And one more thing, with the actual system in itself, you have to go through and, well, hunt down the highest moat user. This actually means if you are an invader, you can actually go in and see how many moats the enemy players have by carrying on top of their actual nameplates, which in itself is pretty easy to see. While actually getting any kills in the evasion is great, being able to hunt down someone who actually has a lot of moats is even better. Steven suggests that the high score moat players are actually one of those people that should be a high value target in this game mode. But that is pretty much it. I've been babbling for way too long, and yeah, Gambit is only, well, a few hours away, I think, at the moment, or it's maybe a day away. We'll see how the actual time thing works. Hopefully this video does go up at the right time. It's not actually later than it should. But anyway, this has been ZacNovak. This has been a rundown of Gambit and a bunch of things you should actually be aware of and definitely kind of keep in mind. I want to give a shout out once again to Polygon. I'll have a link to all these articles down in the comment section. Once again, this has been ZacNovak. Do all that good stuff, and I'll be Sharon like Karen in there. He was that Sharon. But until next time, this is ZacNovak signing off. Peace out.